Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. And also, the Search for the Ancient Bauble Kickstarter has launched, so make sure you go check that out. The Kickstarter campaign will last for 30 days, and after that, the playmat will no longer be available for purchase. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So today's episode comes to you courtesy of Noah, who's been supporting this channel as a general tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Noah, so again, Noah, thank you so much. And actually today, Noah's gonna handle the intro for me.
Hi Mitch, this is Noah from Houston. For my deck tech, I'd like to see you build around Veyran, Voice of Duality, focusing on spell slinging and spell copying.
So, as Noah said, today's deck tech's going to be built around Veyran, Voice of Duality. Veyran is a 2/2 Efreet wizard for 1 blue-red. She has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Veyran, Voice of Duality gets ++1 until end of turn. And if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers initial time. So because of Veyran's trigger, she has become known as the Spell-Harmonicon Commander. Just as Panharmonicon deals with doubling up your ETBs, Veyran deals with doubling up your triggers for instants and sorceries. And that is, of course, an incredible amount of value that she can provide to you. Now, of course, she does get more powerful with the more spells that you cast and copy, but that's not really all that impactful compared to other things that you can do with this. There are many much more powerful triggers than is it that she can double up for you. So once you're set up and she's in play, you can take over the game in no time with just a couple of spells. So let's first start off talking about a fantastic trigger that she can double up with Birgies. Birgie says, whenever you cast a spell, add red. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Birgie is already an incredibly impactful card in a lot of decks. Essentially, whenever you cast any spell, Birgie's gonna give you a mana back. So it's kind of like a mini ritual type effect. And again, with Veyran, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, Birgie's gonna give us 2 mana instead. So a lot of our instants and sorceries in this deck are just 1 mana, so when we cast them, we're essentially generating mana. Yeah, that can get out of control very quickly. And speaking of getting out of control, there's Stormkiln Artist. It has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a treasure token. So yeah, much like Birgie, this can actually give us more mana back than what we put into the spell. Now again, unlike Birgie, this only triggers for instants and sorceries, but we're going to be running plenty of those in this deck. And also unlike Birgie, it also counts us copying spells as well. And of course, we can utilize those treasures whenever we need to, so if we want to hold on to them, we can. And then something like Goblin Electromancer can really help us out in this deck as well. It says instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So for any of those instants and sorceries that cost more than 1 mana, it can essentially reduce their cost down to almost nothing. And again, this mana reduction in combination with things like Birgie and Stormkiln, things can get out of control incredibly quickly. And speaking of getting out of control, let's talk about some fantastic ways to copy some of our spells with Double Vision, Swarm Intelligence, and Krark. Double Vision says, whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So although this only applies to the first instant or sorcery that we cast in a turn, thanks to our commander, we get this trigger twice. So we get the initial spell and then 2 copies. And again, keep in mind that those copies are also going to trigger other Magecraft triggers twice. Yeah, Veyran is pretty busted. Anyways, moving on to an even more busted card with Swarm Intelligence. It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So essentially, this is the exact same thing as Double Vision, but without that restriction of it being the first spell that you cast in a turn. Yeah, when this is in play, it's going to be game over very quickly. And speaking of game over, there's Krark the Thumbless, which says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, return that spell to its owner's hand. If you win the flip, copy that spell and you may choose new targets for the copy. So essentially, you get to flip 2 coins when you cast any instant or sorcery spell. Because of this, there are essentially 3 things that can happen. If you win both flips, you're getting 2 copies of that spell. If you lose both flips, the spell goes back to your hand. And if you win one flip and lose one flip, the spell goes back to your hand and you get a copy of it. And that is completely absurd in a deck like this. With the cast spell and with the copy, you essentially are going to get a ton of double Magecraft triggers thanks to your commander. And then that spell goes back to your hand, so yeah, you can cast it again. And keep in mind, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be running a lot of low-to-the-ground spells that just cost 1 mana. So we can essentially cast it an absurd number of times until we happen to win 2 flips. And by that point, we've probably drawn into more cards that we can cast, and you see where this is going. Yeah, Karark is basically Veyran's best friend. And speaking of digging deeper into our deck, let's talk about some cards that can help us with card advantage with things like Jace's Sanctum, Jorian Ruindiver, and Wavebreak Hippocamp. Jace's Sanctum says, instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. Again, that mana reduction on this can be huge for a deck like this. And on top of that, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we get to scry 1 twice thanks to our commander. And while it's not technically card advantage, it is card selection, which can really help us out. And then Jorian Ruindiver says, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, draw a card. Casting 2 spells in a turn is incredibly easy for this deck, and again, when we do so, we're drawing 2 cards instead of 1 thanks to our commander. In a somewhat similar way, there's Wavebreak Hippocamp, which says whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, draw a card. So just casting 1 spell on an opponent's turn is going to net us 2 cards. Now, as good as all these cards are, there's one that stands clearly above the rest, in my opinion. And that would be the Golden Pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Archmage Emeritus. Archmage Emeritus is a 2/2 human wizard for 2 blue. It has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. Now, this might seem like a very simple draw engine, but with this commander, it is absolutely insane. Again, simply by casting any instant or sorcery spell, we're going to be drawing 2 cards. And again, there is no draw restriction on when we have to cast it or whatnot, it just is any spell. On top of that, it counts whenever we copy an instant or sorcery as well. And again, with a copy, our commander also doubles that up too. So say that we have our commander and Swarm Intelligence in play. We cast a spell, Swarm Intelligence triggers twice, copying it twice. We draw 2 for the original, and then we draw 2 for each copy. We just drew 6 cards for 1 spell. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And again, even without that copying, it's still incredible in this deck, and that's why it's the Golden Pig. But now let's move on and talk about some of those instants and sorceries that we're going to be casting. Again, like I mentioned before, we're going to be running a lot of low-to-the-ground spells like Brainstorm, Serum Visions, and Portent. Each of these are essentially cantrips in one way or another, and again, they just cost us 1 mana. Brainstorm says draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Serum Vision says draw a card, scry 2. And Portent says look at the top 3 cards of target player's library, then put them back in any order you may have that player shuffle their library. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. And again, even a delayed draw like this can be fantastic in this kind of a deck. Just having to pay 1 mana for a spell and getting double triggers off of it is huge, especially spells that replace themselves as well. And of course, outside of our 1 mana cantrips, we also have other spells that are essentially cheap. Treasure Cruise does cost 7 in a blue, but it does have Delve, so we can just exile cards from our graveyard to help pay for that 7. And then it says draw 3 cards. So yeah, paying just a blue mana to draw 3 cards is pretty fantastic. And then Frantic Search is an instant for 2 in a blue, and it says draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, untap up to 3 lands. So though this doesn't provide us card advantage, it does provide card selection, and it's essentially free to cast. We're also going to be running some spells that we can cast multiple times with things like Faithless Looting, Think Twice, and Past in Flames. Faithless Looting says draw 2, then discard 2, and it's got flashback for 2 in a red. Think Twice is going to have us draw 1 card, and we can flash it back for 2 in a blue. And then Past in Flames says each instant sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost, and it's got flashback for 4 in a red. So yeah, Past in Flames can be an absolutely absurd card in a deck like this, essentially giving us access to our entire graveyard of spells. And speaking of absurd and incredibly powerful turns, let's talk about Mana Geyser and Mind's Desire. Mana Geyser says add red for each tap land your opponents control. In a 4-player game like Commander, yeah, this can give us a ton of mana in 1 turn. So it can help us cast an absurd number of spells and get us a lot of triggers, and we're gonna win pretty quickly from there. And speaking of casting an absurd number of spells, there's Mind's Desire. It says shuffle your library, then exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost, and it's got Storm. So when we cast this spell, we copy it for each spell cast before this turn. So we cast some spells, we get some copies, and we have a lot of fun. And keep in mind that our commander is going to double up triggers from those copies, as well as the other spells that we cast off the top. Now, casting a ton of things and getting a lot of value is fun, but how do we actually win? First up, let's talk about some cards like Firebrand Archer, Electrostatic Field, and Gutter Snipe. Firebrand Archer says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Firebrand Archer deals 1 damage to each opponent. And again, thanks to our commander, that's gonna be 2. And then Electrostatic Field is essentially the exact same thing, but just for instants and sorceries, and again, it's gonna dish out 2 damage thanks to our commander. An even bigger effect, though, comes from Gutter Snipe, which originally is gonna be doing 2 for each instant and sorcery, but now it deals 4. So yeah, 4 damage to each opponent per each instant sorcery that we cast. Yeah, they're not gonna last very long. That's 12 damage in total per spell, and again, we've got a lot of 1 mana spells in this deck, so that's a ton of value and a ton of pain on our opponents. And speaking of pain on our opponents, let's talk about Grape Shot. Grape Shot's gonna deal 1 damage to any target, and it's got Storm, so again, like Mind's Desire, we copy it for each other spell that we cast that turn. So again, if we cast an absurd amount of spells in a turn, we can then cast this and say goodbye to our opponents. Or we can overwhelm our opponents with a ton of tokens with things like Young Pyromancer, Murmuring Mystic, and Tolerant Sky Summoner. Young Pyromancer says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 red elemental creature token. Again, thanks to our commander, we get 2 tokens instead of 1. So then Murmuring Mystic is going to make us 2 birds, and Tolerant's going to make us 2 2/2 flying drakes. So yeah, again, with the number of instants and sorceries that we can cast with this deck, we're going to be taking over the game very quickly with any of these in play. And finally, a new version of these kinds of cards comes in really handy as well with Dika Fractal Theorist. She has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. Put X++1 counters on it where X is that spell's mana value. And by paying 3 and a blue, target creature token can't be blocked this turn. So again, keep in mind that Dika not only counts when you cast instants and sorceries, but also when you copy them as well. So you're going to be getting twice as many fractals for either. And then if you really want to, you can start to make some of them unblockable. So best of luck to your opponents. But now it's time for me to wrap up this episode and give you my final thoughts on this commander. Veyran truly is the Spell-Harmonicon Commander that players have been waiting for. The amount of value that she can generate you throughout the game is absolutely absurd. And again, once you're set up with a deck like this, it can be very hard to stop you, and you can just win in absolutely no time. So, best of luck to your opponents if this is your new commander. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you, so make sure you comment below and let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.